Hello learners, I am Dr. Preeti Rani Jain, Assistant Professor in Department of Philosophy, Hansraj College, University of Delhi. Today I am going to talk about three fundamental Jain doctrines, Anekāntavāda, SYādVāda and Nayavāda. The Jain metaphysical doctrine, Anekāntavāda, and its corresponding epistemological doctrines, SYādVāda and Nayavāda, are among the most important contributions of the Jain tradition to the world philosophy. Anekāntavāda states that reality is complex and has multiple aspects. Reality can be expressed, can be experienced, but it is not possible to completely express it with language. So language has certain limitations. SYādVāda and Nayavāda of Jainism expand on the concept of Anekāntavāda. These are also called the wings of the bird Anekāntavāda. The study of these theories holds relevance in the context of the dogmatic scenario of our present world. These help one to develop an open-minded attitude towards others' perspectives and judgments. These doctrines have profound implications for the discourse of interreligious dialogue and religious pluralism. In recent time also, we have seen that scholars have shown interest in the exploring relevance of these Jain doctrines, SYādVāda, Anekāntavāda and Nayavāda, to critical thinking education. And there are researchers to see the possibility of using these as tools for philosophical practice to remove cognitive biases. So today's lecture will focus on explaining these three fundamental doctrines of Jainism in a lucid manner. Fruitful, before we start talking about these three different doctrines, it would be better to know a little bit about the Jain tradition itself. The term Jain is derived from the Sanskrit word Jin, which means who conquered, that is the one who has conquered mind, man, senses, indriya and passions, kashai. In Jainism, there are four different types of kashayas: krodh, man, maya and lobh. So one has to conquer all these four types of passions, control senses and mind. So those who have achieved enlightenment are called Jin or the conquerors, and tradition's monastic adherents, sadhu sadhvi, and lay adherents, shravak shravika, are called Jain or followers of the conquerors. If we talk about the origin of this particular philosophical system, Jainism is considered to be eternal dharma and traces its spiritual ideas and history through a succession of 24 jinas or tirthankaras in every time cycle of the cosmology. So the first in the current time cycle is Rishabdev, who is considered to have lived millions of years ago, and the 24th is Tirthankar Mahavir, whose time period is dated back to 600 BCE. Mahavir is not the founder of Jainism, but he gave an orientation to already existing religion. And for all practical purposes, modern Jainism may be regarded as the result of his teachings. From the three theories that we are focusing on in today's lecture, the root of Anekāntavāda can be traced back to teachings of Mahavir. The dialectical concept of conditioned viewpoint, SYādVāda, and partial viewpoint, Nayavāda, arose from Anekāntavāda in the medieval era, which provided Jainism a more detailed logical structure and expression. The details of the doctrine emerged in Jainism in the first millennium CE, from debates between scholars of Jainism, Buddhism, and Hindu schools of philosophies. Let us now discuss these doctrines one by one. We'll start with the Anekāntavāda. Anekāntavāda is one of the most important and fundamental doctrines of Jainism. It represents Jain's position that ultimate reality is complex and has multiple aspects. The word Anekāntavāda is a compound of two Sanskrit words, Anekānt and Vād. The word Anekānt itself is composed of three root words, N, which means not, Ek, which means one, and Ant, which means end or side. So if we combine the meaning of these three different words, it means not one-ended. Another component of Anekāntavāda is Vād. Vād means doctrine. Thus the term Anekāntavāda is translated as the doctrine of many-sidedness or non-one-sidedness. Jain metaphysics is a realistic and relativistic pluralism. The whole existence is explained in terms of two substances, Jeev and Ajeev. So, in Jainism, whole reality has been divided into 6 substances, Jeev, and under Ajeev, it has been further divided into 5. So, these 5 are Pudgal, matter, Dharm, principle of motion, Adharm, principle of rest, Kal, time, Akash, space. In Jainism, matter, Pudgal, and Jeev, soul, are regarded as separate and independent realities. There are innumerable material atoms and innumerable individual souls, which are all separately and independently real. They do not depend on the other for their existence. Jain propounded the view Vastu Swatantratyavad, and each atom and each soul possesses innumerable aspects of its own. In Jainism, it is stated that a thing has got infinite number of characteristics of its own. Anant dharmakam vastu. Every substance possesses innumerable positive and negative qualities. So we can take up an example of an apple. Like apple possesses a number of aspects like its color, shape, taste, nutrient value, etc. So reality is also manifolded. So in Jainism, substance is also defined as that which possesses the 3 characteristics of production, destruction, and permanence. Utpadve dravya yuktam sat. The substance has unchanging essence and therefore is permanent, but it also has its changing modes and therefore is subject to origination and decay. This can be understood through the example of different ornaments made out of the substance gold. Okay, just think of a scenario where somebody bought some gold biscuit, okay, and then on a fine day that person decided that, I want to make some bangles through these gold biscuits, and that person using the same gold biscuit, same gold material, makes the bangles out of that matter. Then after wearing bangles for certain years, that person gets bored of those bangles. So that person decides to make gold chain out of the same matter. And then after wearing gold chain for certain years, that person thinks of, let me just make gold ring out of the same matter. So in all these different ornaments, matter that has been used is same. Okay, substance gold has been same. Only the mode, only the prai has been changed throughout. So gold's malleability, ductileness and yellowness can be regarded as essential qualities, and different ornaments made out of gold substance can be seen as its changing modes. Bangles, gold chain, ring, are nothing but modifications of the same substance, gold. So, Anekāntavāda has also been taken to mean non-absolutism, intellectual ahimsa, religious pluralism. It also leads to the rejection of fanaticism, which is the reason for terror attacks and mass violence. Anekāntavāda can be reinterpreted with religious tolerance, open-mindedness, and pluralism. Absolutism, defined as intentional unmindfulness of the complexity of reality, the elevation of one aspect of reality at the expense of all the other, is the seed of all violence. This is why the Jain approach to the diversity of worldviews has come to be seen by many Jain thinkers as a form of intellectual ahimsa. The ideal of non-violence in thought, word, and deed, man, vachan, kaya, mein ahimsa, translated and applied to the realm of intellectual discourse. To mistake any one-sided view as the whole truth is to commit the fallacy of Ekantvad. Now it is further maintained that out of innumerable qualities of the substance, some are permanent and essential, while others are changing and accidental. The former are called attributes or gun, and the later modes or priyae. Viewed from the point of view of substance, a thing is one and permanent and real. Viewed from the point of view of modes, it is many, momentary, and unreal. This account of nature of an entity by Jain thinkers can be seen as the synthesis of Buddhist view of an entity as something ever-changing, momentary, and impermanent, and Vedic views of an entity as an intrinsically permanent, unchanging substance. So Jain brings both perspectives together without any conceptual contradiction. Now, to understand the epistemological side of this metaphysical doctrine Anekāntavāda, we need to understand what Jain talks about human condition and their capability to gain knowledge. According to Jainism, Jeev or a soul is a conscious substance. They believe that the union of soul with the body is bondage, and karma, the link that unites the soul to the body. Karma in Jainism is envisioned as a material substance, subtle matter, that can bind to the soul, travel with the soul in the bonded form between rebirths, and affect the suffering and happiness experienced by the Jeev in the lokas. Karma is believed to obscure and obstruct the innate nature and striving of the soul, as well as its spiritual potential. Just as if there is dust on the glass, one cannot see through it clearly, similarly, if the innate nature of the soul is obstructed, one cannot know the reality completely. So, in bonded form, it is not possible for us ordinary people to know all the qualities of a thing. We can know only some qualities of some things. Human knowledge is necessarily relative and limited, and so are all our judgments. According to Jainism, no single specific statement can describe the nature of existence and the absolute truth. Jainism further says that this knowledge, Keval Gyan, is comprehended only by Arihant or omniscient being. So once all the karmas are eradicated, one can gain the innate nature, soul can gain the innate nature, and in that particular state, one can know the reality as it is. The ancient Jain text often explain the concept of Anekāntavāda and SYādVāda with the parable of blind men, 6 blind men, and an elephant, that is called Ant Gaj Ne, which addresses the manifold nature of truth. So story goes like this. A group of blind men, 6 blind men, heard that a strange animal called an elephant had been brought to the town. but none of them were aware of its shape and form. So out of curiosity, they said, we must inspect and know it by touch, of which we are capable. So they sought it out, and when they found it, they groped about it. In the case of the first person whose hand landed on the trunk, that person said that this being is like a huge snake. This being is like a huge snake. For another, one whose hand reaches its ear, that person said that it looks like a fan. The one whose hand reaches out to the leg, that person said that, this being looks like a pillar. Okay, the one who touched the tail of the elephant, that person said that this animal is somewhat like, its shape is somewhat like a rope. Now, each of these presented a true aspect when they related what they had gained from experiencing the elephant. But none of them had strayed from the true description of the elephant. Yet they fell short of fathoming the true appearance of the elephant. So the dispute here was mainly due to mistaking a partial truth for the whole truth. So the problem is with when one says that this is the only truth. Okay, so we need to acknowledge that something which we are perceiving is not the only truth, but that is also one of the truth. So what this parable actually teaches us, that we cannot know the reality as such. So how can we know the reality, as reality is manifolded and multifaceted? We can know the object in three ways: through durniti, न्याय, and praman. When we mistake a partial truth for the whole, and absolute truth is, when we consider the partial truth for the whole or absolute truth, it is called durniti or bad judgment. We are at some mistake. A mere statement of relative truth without calling it either absolute or relative is called न्याय or judgment. And when a statement of partial truth, knowing that it is only a partial, relative, and conditional, and has the possibility of being differently interpreted from different points of view, is called praman or valid judgment. So in the durniti, there is rigidness to call one's truth to be the only truth or absolute truth. That is called durniti. But in the Nayavad, in the Nay statement, we are aware of it that we are speaking about something from a particular context. And in the SYΑDVާD, we acknowledge it that apart from this statement, apart from our truth, there are other truths also. Okay, so every न्याय in order to become praman must be qualified by the word syad. That's what SYADVÁD theory says. So we'll be looking at the SYADVÁD theory in detail in a while. So syad is said to be a symbol of truth. It removes all contradictions among different points of view. So now let us first look at the Nayavad, and then we'll look at the SYADVÁD theory. In Jainism, Nayavad is the teaching of the different viewpoints. It offers a different perspective that can be taken with regard to any subject depending on what elements the observer focuses on. Typically, 7 viewpoints are presented when explaining Nayavad. But this list is not exhaustive. As I already pointed out, reality is manifolded, so there can be many or plural viewpoints through which we can look at the reality. Given the infinite number of properties, every object possesses infinite number of one could also say that there is an infinite number of viewpoints from which the object can be observed and discussed. In the right circumstances, each न्याय is a legitimate way of viewing the world, as long as it is remembered that they just provide a view from a particular angle, not a full image of reality. So Umaswati, he is one of the Jain Acharya who wrote Tattva Arth Sutra, one of the book which was, which is accepted by both Digambar and Shwetambar sects. So Umaswati lists 7 partial viewpoint or 7 Nyas. Negam Nyay, common view, संग्रह न्याय, generic view, व्यवहार न्याय, रजु सूत्र न्याय, शब्द न्याय, संविरुद्ध न्याय, and एवं भूत न्याय. Now let us look at these 7 nyas one by one. So the first nyaya, negam nyaya, or the common view, here in this perspective we look at the thing which have both universal and particular qualities. Both are regarded as separately real and absolute as done by Nyaya Vaisheshika. So Jaina says that, each Indian philosophical school is right from their perspective. But what went wrong that, they consider their perspective to be the complete perspective. So when someone is considering reality in this way, they are at fault. Now, if we look at the second nyaya, sangarha nyaya or generic view, here we emphasize the universal quality and ignore the particulars where they are manifested. It becomes fallacious when both universal universal alone are treated as absolutely real and particulars are rejected as unreal. And this kind of philosophy is given by Advaita Vedanta and Sankhya school. Now the third nyaya is Vyavhar nyaya. Vyavhar nyaya is also, Vyavhar nyaya is a pragmatic view. Here we assess the entity in terms of its possible uses. It's based on empirical knowledge. So here things are taken as concrete particulars and their specific features are established. So Charvak or materialist school of Indian philosophy looks at the reality from this particular perspective. Now moving to the fourth nyaya is Rajusutra nyaya. Rajusutra nyaya or the linear view looks at the entity as it is in the present moment. Okay, here we look at the entity from the present moment. Particulars are reduced to a series of moments and any given moment is regarded as truth. So out of the 9 Indian philosophical schools, Buddhists who are also, one of the heterodox school, Buddhists who represent the heterodox school, they hold this position. Okay, they believe that reality, they believe that, there is nothing permanent. Okay, everything keeps on changing. Now, moving to the next nyaya, that is fifth nyaya, shabd nyaya, or the verbal view. It means that a word is necessarily related to the meaning that it signifies. Every word refers either to a thing or quality or relation or action. So conventionally, okay, when we refer to any object, we use a particular name or we use a name that designates or refer to that particular object. So in conventional sense, when we use the language, in conventional sense, when we use the word to designate the particular objects or reality, that is called the Shabd nyaya. Next nyaya is Samviruddh nyaya, etymological view. Here we distinguish terms according to their roots. So here we do not use the words in the conventional sense, but we also look at how those words has been originated. So it can be seen as the specialized form of the fifth nyaya. And looking at the seventh nyaya, seventh nyaya is a more specialized form of the sixth nyaya. Seventh nyaya is evam bhut nyaya or actuality view. So here in this particular nyaya, we say that name should be applied to an object when its meaning is fulfilled. So if we take up one example, a cow should be called go. Go in a literal sense means an object or something which moves. Okay, so we can call a cow a go only when it moves, not when it is laying down. So each ne or point of view represents only one of the innumerable aspects possessed by a thing from which we may attempt to know or describe it. When any such partial viewpoint is mistaken for the whole truth, we have a nebhas or a fallacy. Now let us move to a valid way of making a judgment from particular standpoints. SYΑDVާD. SYADVÁD is a theory of conditional predication which provides an expression to Anekāntavāda by recommending that the indeclinable syād or syāt, which means in a certain sense, be prefixed to every phrase or expression. In the context of Jain thought, syāt, often paired with ev, surely or certainly means in some specific sense or from specific perspective. It is certainly the case that, so as reality is complex, no single proposition can express the nature of reality fully. Thus, the term syād should be prefixed before each proposition, giving it a conditional point of view, and thus removing any kind of dogmatism in the statement, as well as indicating that the sentence is truly only from a statement has been made truly from a particular standpoint. Okay, so since it ensures that each statement is expressed from 7 different conditional and relative viewpoints or propositions, SYADVÁD is known as Saptabhaṇgīnaya, or the theory of 7 conditional predications. These 7 propositions, also known as Saptabhaṇgī, are SYADNASTI, SYADNASTI, which means that from a certain perspective a thing is. Okay, if we take up an example of, say, table, so from the perspective of its own material, wood, a table is. But if the table is not made up of iron, then from the perspective of another matter, the table is not. Okay, so from a particular perspective it is, and from the another perspective, from the another matter, it is not. So the first one is Syad Asti, which means from a certain perspective a thing is. Syad Nasti, from a certain perspective a thing is not. And the third one says that Syad Asti cha Nasti, from a certain perspective it is and it is not. So the fourth ne is Syad Asti Avyaktavyam. From a certain perspective it is and it is indescribable. Moving to the next ne, that is fifth ne, Syādnasti Avyaktavyam. Here we say that from a certain perspective it is not and it is indescribable. Then in the sixth ne, we say that Syad Asti, Syad Nasti, Avyaktavyam. So from a certain perspective it is not, and it is indescribable. Seventh ne, which is Syad Avyaktavyam, it says that from a certain perspective it is indescribable. So generally this one is kept after the third one, Syad Asti, Syad Nasti, Syad Asti cha Nasti, Syad Avyaktavyam. And then we can see that fourth, fifth and sixth are combination of this one, Syad Avyaktavyam, with Syad Asti, Syad Nasti and Syad Asti Nasti. Okay, Syad Asti Avyaktavyam, Syad Nasti Avyaktavyam and Syad Asti Nasti Avyaktavyam. So each of these seven nes or 7 propositions examines the complex and multifaceted nature of reality from a real point of view of time, space, substance, and mode. To ignore the complexity of reality is to commit the fallacy of dogmatism. For example, a table exists in its own matter, is as made up of wood, in its own form as having a particular shape. Okay, table might be of round shape or say square shaped or rectangular shape. So from a particular perspective it is, and from the another perspective it is not. And it exists in a particular space. Say that in a room A, table is, but in room B, table is not. And at a particular time, like someone who bought the table today only, it was not there with reference to the yesterday's time, but it is here like in reference to the today's time. So we generally talk about something's existence and non-existence with reference to its substance, time, space, and mode. So if I summarize the whole discussion and all these three fundamental doctrines of Jainism, Anekāntavāda is a metaphysical doctrine, okay, where we look at what reality is and what is the nature of reality. So in their metaphysical belief, as I pointed out, that Jainas are relative and realistic pluralistic school. So according to them, reality is manifolded. As we took the example of apple, that apple is red, sweet, nutritious, round, etc. So reality is considered to have the multiple aspect. Now, if we talk about the Nayavad, Nayavad means knowing the reality from a particular standpoint. As reality is manifolded and we in the bonded form are limited beings, we do not have the clear vision of the reality with its complete nature, so we can know the things from a particular perspective. So example could be the color of apple is red. So here we are knowing a thing from the perspective of its color. Then the third theory, SYādVāda, Saptabhaṇgīnaya, here we insert the word Syāt to show that our judgment is only from a particular standpoint. So here we acknowledge that apart from our standpoint, apart from our perspective, there are other perspectives as well. So for this we can take up this example. Apple is Syāt, red in color. But one might say that, if apple is red in color and we are saying that in some sense it is red in color, this does not make sense. But it makes sense because when we peel it off, it is white in color, and if apple juice color might be different. So from a particular perspective that it is red in color, but from different point of views it might not be considered to have the same color. So Nay qualified by Syāt is called Praman. So Nay is a relative knowledge, knowing from a particular standpoint, and when we acknowledge that we are knowing something from a particular standpoint, by adding this word Syāt, it becomes the Praman or absolute knowledge. And from this point of view, we can see that the Jainas are not skeptical in their epistemological point of view. They are not denying the possibility of knowledge. What they are saying, that we as limited being cannot know the reality as such. So we can know only from a particular perspective. If we consider partial truth to be the whole truth, it is called durniti or bad judgment. If someone says that apple is only a red thing, so here the person is having a limited view about the reality. Now, if I talk about the recent developments, how these theories has been utilized by this contemporary scholars, so I would like to quote the work of Professor A.J. Vaidya, who is professor at San Jose State University, California. He says that Jainism can be used as practical tool for critical thinking that showcases the intellectual virtue of constructive engagement. The move to a cross-culturally sensitive approach to critical thinking pedagogy comes from the recognition and realization that our individual epistemic perspectives are limited, that these limitations are in part a function of social conditioning that brings with it implicit biases, and how reaching out to those from distinct tradition can help us give awareness of what our individual biases are and how we can coordinate critical thinking so as to reduce the negative effect of individual biases. Okay, thank you everyone.